One chilly morning, John, a rugged man accustomed to life in the wilderness near his isolated cabin, was out for a walk. The forest was still and serene, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. However, that tranquility was shattered by a sudden pained howl that echoed through the trees. John froze. The anguished cry came from nearby, deep within the dense underbrush. His heart quickened with alarm as he recognized the unmistakable sound of a wolf in distress. Dropping his gear, he immediately set off toward the noise, his instincts kicking in. The forest seemed alive with sounds as he navigated through the thick, untamed brush. His boots crunched on the dry leaves, his breath sharp in the cool morning air. As he approached the source, he moved cautiously, aware of the potential danger, but driven by the desire to help. Peering through a cluster of dense foliage, his eyes locked on the scene in front of him. A massive wolf, clearly in agony, caught in a rusty, cruel trap. The animal's legs were ensnared in the unforgiving iron jaws of the device. The wolf, despite her frantic attempts to free herself, seemed to have surrendered to her fate. She lay there, panting heavily, her eyes filled with exhaustion and desperation. John felt a pang of shock and sympathy. The wolf was a striking creature, her fur thick and matted, but her eyes spoke volumes of the pain and terror she was enduring. He wanted to help, but hesitated, not sure how to approach the dangerous animal. As he carefully moved closer, the wolf's sharp instincts kicked in. She growled at him, snapping her teeth in warning, clearly viewing him as a potential threat. Her body tensed, and she jerked against the trap, pulling at the chains in a desperate attempt to escape. John's heart raced. He could see the anguish in her eyes, but he knew that any sudden movement might provoke her into attacking out of sheer panic. Still, he couldn't leave her there to suffer, not when there was a chance he could help. Stepping back, he took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. As he observed the wolf more carefully, something caught his attention. She was clearly a female, her swollen teats indicating that she had recently given birth. His stomach churned with concern. If she had pups somewhere, they were likely alone and vulnerable, unable to survive long without their mother. Realizing the urgency of the situation, John made a split-second decision. He had to act quickly if he was going to save both the mother wolf and her pups. But getting any closer to the stressed and injured animal was going to be a challenge. Her leg was bleeding heavily, and she was clearly losing strength, both from the wound and from the cold. If left in the trap, she would soon die. Determined not to let that happen, John steeled himself. He donned a pair of thick gloves, the kind he used for tasks around the cabin, for added protection. Slowly, carefully, he moved closer to the wolf, speaking in a soft, soothing voice to try to calm her. He knew it was a delicate situation. Any wrong move could make the wolf panic and lash out. When he reached her, he carefully touched her trapped paw. To his surprise, she didn't react. The wolf's breath was shallow and weak, and her body seemed to be shutting down. John knew that time was running out. He gently cradled the wolf's head, attempting to stabilize her as he tried to release the trap, but it was stuck, jammed tight from her frantic struggles. Panic began to rise in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Looking around, he spotted a nearby stone. With no time to lose, he grabbed it and began striking the trap's mechanism, hoping to dislodge it. After several forceful blows, the trap finally snapped open, freeing the wolf's leg, but she was still unconscious, her body limp and unresponsive. Knowing the wolf could wake up at any moment and potentially attack in fear and confusion, John quickly fashioned a soft rope from a spare piece of cord in his pocket. He tied it loosely around her muzzle, careful not to restrict her breathing, just enough to prevent her from biting him. With great caution, John managed to drag the injured wolf from the trap, fashioning a makeshift stretcher out of nearby branches and his heavy coat. His heart raced as he carefully placed her onto the stretcher, his muscles straining as he began to drag her toward his cabin. The journey was grueling, taking nearly an hour as he navigated the uneven terrain. Every movement had to be deliberate, and John's strength began to wane. But the thought of saving the wolf kept him moving. When he finally reached the cabin, John was nearly exhausted. He pulled the wolf inside and gently placed her by the fireplace. The crackling warmth of the fire filled the room, and he quickly set to work on her injuries. Using a first aid kit that he kept for emergencies, John cleaned and dressed the wound on her leg. His experience from his military days came in handy, and he applied antiseptic carefully to avoid infection. The wolf's leg was badly injured but not broken, a relief for John. He wrapped it tightly to prevent further damage, knowing that if he hadn't acted quickly, she would have lost the leg. As he worked, the wolf remained motionless, barely responsive. But there was a subtle change. Her breathing had slowed, and she seemed less tense. Once he had stabilized her, John took a moment to sit back and breathe deeply. He wasn't sure how long it would take for the wolf to recover, but he knew he had done everything he could. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she seemed to trust him. There was a deep, quiet understanding in her gaze. John promised the wolf that he would find her pups and bring them back to her. After ensuring the wolf was comfortable, John grabbed his pack and headed back into the forest. His military training and years of living in the wild had sharpened his senses, and he was determined to find the pups. He knew the den would likely be nearby, hidden in the rugged terrain he knew so well. Hours passed as John hiked through the forest, following signs and markings he had learned to recognize. Finally, he found the den he had suspected, tucked beneath a large fallen tree. The faint sound of whimpering reached his ears as he approached. Lying flat on his stomach, John carefully peered inside. 4 tiny wolf pups huddled together, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. He knew he had to move slowly, carefully, to avoid scaring them. He softened his voice, coaxing them out of the den with gentle words. Slowly, one by one, the pups emerged, drawn to John's calm presence. The smallest, bolder pup made the first move, sniffing at his hands. John smiled as the others followed, their tails wagging in cautious excitement. After a few moments of playful nuzzling, John gently scooped the pups into his coat pockets, ensuring each one was warm and secure. He couldn't carry them all at once, but he managed to transport them back to the cabin. When John returned, the mother wolf stirred, her ears perking up at the faint sounds of her pups. Weakly, she struggled to rise, her body still recovering from the trauma. As soon as the pups were placed on the floor, they rushed to her side, their tails wagging furiously. The reunion was beautiful and heartwarming, with the mother wolf licking her pups lovingly, her body language showing her gratitude. In the days that followed, John cared for the wolf family, providing them with food and ensuring the mother's recovery. He even built a small enclosure for them in his yard, a safe space for the wolves to heal while giving them room to roam. But one morning, something unexpected happened. John went into the forest to gather firewood, leaving his cabin door open. The scent of the pups had drawn the attention of the wolf pack. By the time John returned, he was met with the unsettling sight of a large pack of wolves gathered in his yard. The pack circled around, their eyes locked on John. The air grew tense as the wolves bared their teeth and growled, ready to attack. Frozen in place, John's heart raced as he tried to assess the situation. He was outnumbered, and the wolves looked menacing. But then, unexpectedly, the female wolf he had rescued stepped forward. With a commanding howl, she stood between John and the pack, her body language radiating authority. The pack hesitated, their growls subsiding. After a moment of tense silence, the pack began to back off, retreating into the woods. John's relief was palpable. He quickly retreated into his cabin, locking the door behind him. As he watched from the window, the pack dispersed, and he exhaled, his heart still pounding. That night, as he lay in bed, he reflected on what he had done. Despite the danger, he had saved the wolf and her pups, giving them a chance to survive. The next morning, John woke to a quiet calm. He stepped outside and followed the tracks of the wolves, eager to see them off. A few hundred meters away, at the top of a hill, he spotted them. The mother wolf and her pups had returned to the wild, to their natural habitat. Watching them from a distance, John felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had given them a second chance at life, and in return, he had learned the true value of his sacrifice. The wolf family had been returned to their rightful place in the forest, free to roam and live once more. And for John, that morning was a reminder of the deep, untold connections between man and nature. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming tales of survival and compassion.